to go ahead and get started because there's a lot to cover today. All right, so welcome. I got some topics I want to talk about. You guys have sent in some topics. We will see what we can get to. If you have a question during these, by the way, and we don't get to it or it's super nuanced, shoot us an email at our OASIS help. I think it's oasishelp@tridentproposals.com. I have the address at the end of the slideshow because sometimes it's just easier to write out the answer or to talk through the nuance of your specific situation. And we can set up a call if there's, if you're in one of those situations where you're like, I just really need to phone a friend and have you, walk us through the nuances of your specific situation. We're happy to do that. And most questions we can answer pretty quickly. So, all right, without further ado, a couple notes on tagging. This has come up a few times. Just a reminder that when you're tagging your contractual documentation, whatever that looks like, right? If you're using a JP3, you don't necessarily have to tag it, but if you're tagging everything, you might as well throw some tags in that as well. Thank you, Kiley. But your FPDS records, your SAM records, your statements of work, all those things, right? Just keep in mind, if you're tagging something to show that it is a QP, there are certain elements that we want you to go through the due diligence of tagging. So contract type, right? Making sure that this is a permissible is the word I was looking for, project. If it's a contract for services, right, you might need to highlight something in your statement of work. You might be able to get by with the NICS code or the PSC, depending on what it's actually classified as. But usually you need to show that this is a contract for services so that it's not a manufacturing contract, right? And all of these things that we're listing out here, by the way, they're just good due diligence things to check anyway to make sure that you really are submitting a project that's going to be eligible for the points you're trying to claim it for. Period of performance, recency, duration, that's what's going to prove those credits. Tagging the value, right? Making sure you're using the correct one. If the project is ongoing, recall that you can use the total contract value with, inclusive of all the ceilings. If the project has ended, you can only use what's actually been obligated. And then your positive past performance rating. And the reason I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this is when you go to actually add your projects in Symphony, it's going to say, are you taking credit for this as a QP? I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but you're going to have to say, yes, I want you to count this as a QP. And then it's going to say, in what files should we look for your tag? And you better have at least two there, right? You're going to need something that shows that it's the right contract type with the basic contractual information. And you also need a CPARS or a JP6 that shows it had a positive rating. Because remember, you have to have at least a satisfactory or higher for it to be a QP. And then in order to get your past performance credits, it's got to have a score above an average 3.0 rating. So do make sure that as you're going through your documents, you've actually shown the evaluators what makes this a QP. Same principle applies for FEPs. Needs to show the right contract type. It needs to show that it's federal prime work, right? You can't use a subcontractor to show, hey, this was my customer. Like, no, not how that works. You only get credit for FEPs if you were actually the prime for a federal customer. Same thing with period of performance, recency, duration, right? Those constraints apply. And then the value, same rules, right? Needs to be the total contract value if the project is ongoing, so you can take credit for the ceiling, only the amount obligated if it is ended. And then make sure that you tag your FEP records for any of those additional FEP credit areas, right? So if you're applying to the R&D domain and this was a SBIR phase 3 or phase 2, or if it was one of the advanced technology readiness levels, your cost reimbursable in that domain, right? You can get credit for that. Same thing with the funding agency ID, just to show your distinct federal customers. How do I want to say this? So if you have QPs and that they all happen to be federal prime work and they all happen to be for different agencies, you won't get that credit for having 3 distinct customers unless you also tell Symphony to grade that project as an FEP. So if you're not seeing a point that you expected to see on your scorecard, that might be the reason why. Okay. Other things to talk about. So about these funding agency IDs. And I was so delighted to get a write-in from our fan club with some amplifying information here. So as we have pointed out on these calls before, if you have pulled an FPDS record and then you pulled a SAM record for the same contract, what's labeled as the funding agency on your SAM record may or may not match what the funding agency ID is on the FPDS record. There is a way to get to that same level of detail field within SAM.gov. but you have to go through the data bank. And if you have not played around with this, you need to just set yourself an hour of time to watch their YouTubes and do that. I'm going to give you a very quick crash course. But before I do that, I just want to let you know, I don't actually know, because we haven't been given the guidance yet, how to generate a report from this this ad hoc feature that would be submissible and identifiable as this kind of report within Symphony. Now, why does that matter? I'm not going to be able to tell you at the end, hey, you need to put exactly these fields and print it and turn that in as a record. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just showing you how you can have validation and verification on your side, because this is something that GSA would be able to pull as well from their side. So my understanding is that they're working on updated guidance to tell people how to submit the report. But if you can go in and verify, like, yes, you have 3 funding agency IDs, and GSA is also going to have that information accessible to them. They know that this is a gap. They know that this funding agency reporting is kind of a weird loophole right now, and they will go through the process of pulling this data in the same way. So I want you to know what they're going to look at so that you're reporting the same test answer that they're ultimately going to grade. So
do you want to say that you may not actually need to do this? If your funding agencies are really different, this may not be necessary for you to dig into. But if you have, for example, the department or the Army and everything showing up as 2100, and you want the nuance of being able to tell apart the different offices that you supported to get that credit because you don't have another way to do it, then you would maybe need this. So if you're looking at this like, oh my gosh, this is so much work, you may not even need it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And where we see this most applicable is for contract vehicles that are like contracted by one agency but funded by another, right? That tends to be the disconnect, because your funding agency, if we just use I'm trying to think if there's an easy one. There's probably not, because I always pick the exception that proves the rule. But let's just say you have something that's contracted by the Air Force, but you were working for the Navy. You're probably not going to see that level of detail on your SAM record. You're going to see that the contracting office was 5,700 for the Air Force, and your funding agency ID on SAM is probably going to display as 9,700, which is just Department of Defense. You're not going to be able to pull that 1,700 code. So this is how you could get to that answer, so that you can put that in your project record when you're uploading things to Symphony, and do it with confidence, right? So within the data bank, if you go to contract data, and I know this is teeny tiny, but just go in and play with it. There's lots of help you videos. It's an ad hoc report, and you're going to do it based on the award IDV information. You'll get to the next screen, and sorry, this is blurry, but basically what that says is create, and then you're going to get a drop down, and you're going to pick the top new report that says blank report, and you're going to fill in some fields. You have to bound it by time first. So you have to give it a start date and an end date from which to pull from. And once you do that, you can get into the actual report builder. So once you say, hey, I'm going to go back 5 years to 2021, you can pick any date in the past. I would just go 5 years back, and then a date in the future. It doesn't really matter, because most of what we're submitting should have already been in place for 6 months, right? Or ended. So this 5-year period is going to pull, I think, for 99% of cases, what you need. And then you're going to go to the, edit in design mode. And once you do that, you're going to get this like grid looking square, and you're going to start adding attributes to your report. So what I want you to do is, you'll get these different attributes, and you'll get this drop down list, and you can pick like business type, and you can pick contract data, and you can pick funding source, right? You can tailor these reports to say what you want them to say. For simplicity, what I recommend you do, is select vendor information as your first attribute. Find the UEI field, drag that to the top section here where it says report filters, and then you will be able to put in your UEI and just see your contract data, right? So if you do that, and then you add the funding agency fields to your actual report, it'll show you, hey, here's your contracts from the last 5 years. Here's the contract ID for this UEI. Here's the funding agency ID. And then you're off to the races to just do your cross check and say, okay, 0007 aligned with 1700. And this one, so when you actually build your report, like I said, you're going to drag your UEI goes in the top section, but then you can use the funding agency ID and the contract ID, or the PIID, right? That's the like actual record identifier that usually correlates to the task order number. You can generate the report from there, and you'll just download it. It'll come out as an Excel So that's why I'm saying, like, I don't want you to upload that Excel to Symphony. This is just so you can check your answers and make sure that, hey, my customer is actually the Navy for this, or is actually the Army, or whomever it happened to be. So I know that was super fast and kind of at a high level, but if you go to the SAM.gov, they have a help desk, right? And they do have videos that walk you through this. And most of them are about 5 to 7 minutes long. So you can build your own customized report just to validate your own data.
You'll also get a copy of these slides and our presentation today. So if you need to come back and check your work, you can.
More. Yeah. Okay. So before you submit, I did just want to mention some gotchas. Please do not take this as Rebecca said, I did these 12 things and now I'm good. These are just common gotchas that we're seeing as we're doing these validation checks prior to submission. So I want to mention them so that, even if you get all of your dates entered correctly in the little fields and you don't mess up anything when you go to select the right file in the dropdown, because boy, that is a fickle menu sometimes, depending on how sensitive your mouse is. I just want to plant the seed about these other things that you should be checking before you actually hit that submit button. So in your SF33, number one, let's make sure that you've pulled the correct SF33 for the solicitation that you are responding to, because there is a different one for the unrestricted IDIQ, the woman-owned small business IDIQ, the service-disabled veteran-owned small business IDIQ, et cetera, right? They all have distinct solicitation numbers. You need to make sure you got the right one. Buried in the solicitation is the instruction that you need to include your UEI along with your company name and address in block 15 alpha. It will not say that on the form, but you need to put your UEI and your cage code within that block. Most people are pretty used to putting their cage code, but because the UEI is not expressly called out on the form, some people miss this. Make sure you also have the right person sign it, right? It needs to be somebody who is able to contractually obligate your company for the purposes of contracts. Okay. For the reps and certs, they're asking for two things here. They're asking you to actually complete the Section K reps and certs from the solicitation. So you can extract those pages and you don't have to make it beautiful and do a copy paste. Like you can just extract the pages from the PDF, but there's a place for you to put your offer name. And then there's at least two sections that you need to respond to. One asks about the value of your federal contracts, and the other has to do with I forget if it's not the cover telecommunications, but there's another block and it's like check 1 or 2. So if you do a control F for the word check, you're going to see the section where it directs you to select and actually pick one of the options. So there are things that you have to do as part of Section K. Along with that, you need to print a copy or download to PDF a copy of your reps and certs from SAM.gov. Even though we all know your SAM.gov records are up to date and they can go in and access that, they want to see a copy of your SAM.gov record frozen in time at the time of submission of your proposal so they can verify size standards and those kind of things. Other things to check. Did you clear all of the errors from your scorecard? If you go into Symphony, when you're looking at your proposal, you're going to see over on the left-hand side, there's the navigation column that, you have your business factors, you have your projects and past performance, right? If you look down towards the bottom, it says scorecard. And within that, if you go into that menu, you're going to see red warnings, you're going to see red errors at the top, and then you're going to see yellow warnings. There's no way to clear the warnings, but you're going to see things here like, you have exceeded the maximum points for scale. You scored yourself as 8, but we've only given you 6. Those are just advisory. They're okay. You don't need to do anything about that. You'll also see the most common one we see is if you submitted a project that's not automatically relevant for the domain, they're going to remind you that you have to prove your relevance. But most of you, if you've been tuning into these webinars, are doing that anyway. So don't get panicky about that. The warnings will stay, but the errors have to get cleared. So it might tell you, hey, your JP13 isn't in the right format, or maybe it's your JP9 that's not in the right format, or you're missing a basis of estimate, right? Do pay attention to those because it means that something's not quite right with either where you have information uploaded or you've forgotten to do something. Okay, for you other than small business offers out there, this one you're gonna roll your eyes and probably cringe a little bit, but for your small business subcontracting plan, particularly if this is an individual small business subcontracting plan, did you actually look at the solicitation and propose the same goals that GSA has recommended in the solicitation? I'm not saying you can't bid something else. I am saying there's a high likelihood that GSA is going to want to have a conversation about your goals if they are lower than the stated goals in the solicitation. Even if you write the most beautiful narrative about why those goals are very difficult for you to achieve, you might get told that you need to reevaluate and revisit those. So if it's at all feasible for your company to bid the goals that they have outlined, you should do that. The profit percentage that you use in your JP9, this is another one of those, they're not going to direct you to use their percentage, but they may have questions if you don't use their recommended percentage. So it's 7.5%. So if you've plugged something else in within that JP9 template, you might want to take a look at that and make sure that you got your ducks in a row and can, stand and deliver a convincing rationale for that profit percentage, even if it's not required at the time of submission. Also make sure you have only your rates only include 2 decimal places. If you copied and pasted from the JP8, which has all the high and low ranges, those numbers have like 6 decimal places. And so you'll get an error generated when you go to upload your template. So do make sure that you've just rounded to 2 decimal places. That's the standard for the JP9 rate data. If you don't have a forward pricing rate agreement, if you don't have approved rates for that you're submitting as part of your contract, have you included a narrative that explains how your company derives your particular indirect rates? That is required for everyone. So if you don't have approved rates, you need to provide a narrative of your indirect rates. Okay, and for your direct labor rates, if those exceed any of the given rate ranges that GSA has provided, did you include a basis of estimate, a narrative basis of estimate for those? That's only required if you are going outside of the ceiling, if you're bidding higher than what GSA has said it calculates the max rate to be. So just make sure that you've got the accompanying, again, evidence and rationale to back that up. Double check your past performance points and make sure that those aggregate correctly. What we found with some submissions is when you're uploading your projects, right, the very first time under my company, when you go to input your project data, if you scroll down to the past performance area, if you have not selected in one of the OASIS Plus, one of the current solicitations that's continuously open, instead of having a type in value range down there, it might just give you a drop down for a positive or a negative rating. That's not what you want. You need to actually put in a numerical value for your past performance averages. And if we have some time at the end here, we can talk about real quickly how those are calculated. So just like I said, you'll see it on the scorecard because you'll be like, I think I'm short like 3 points that I thought I was going to get. That might be why. So go back into your project setup and just see, is there a number there for past performance or does it just say positive rating? Just remember that Symphony is used for multiple proposal submissions. So it might be that your preferences are stuck on the wrong solicitation. Okay, the JP3s. This is something that check it again and check it a third time. If you're using a JP3, you still have to include the contracting officer's contact information, even if they are not the person who signed the form. GSA acknowledges that there are going to be circumstances in which the CO is not available. That does not remove your responsibility to put their contact information in that form. So it's okay if the Corps signed it, as long as you include the CO's contact information. So just make sure that you've got the right signatures and the right fields for those JP3s. Your certifications, maybe you're like, oh yeah, our ISO cert's totally good to go. Time has a way of warping when you're working on proposals, especially if you're one of those poor souls who's doing proposals back to back to back. Just double check those, right? Even if you had it uploaded from last time, just make sure that things are still within periodicity, because remember, it needs to be current as of the time of proposal submission. And then by the way here is that you're going to have to maintain that. The expectation is that you maintain anything you take credit for the life of your contract. So if there have been changes and you haven't let your contracting officer know, if you're one of those phase 1 peoples who got the award and then maybe something lapsed, you should have contacted your contracting officer to let them know that there's been a change to your profile. So you don't want to have any kind of false claims around those certifications. And then if you're a new bidder, this is something that maybe you looked at OASIS Plus during phase 1 and you didn't end up submitting a bid, but you're ready for it this go round. and you got your balance sheets, you got your income statements, but there's a third form or a third type of information that has to get submitted with your price data, and that's that summary sheet that's going to basically pull out the fields that GSA cares. I don't say they care the most about it, but they're probably the things they're going to evaluate first. So you do have to submit that JP13 if you're bidding on phase 2. I'm not talking about domain enhancement, folks. I'm talking about new bidders. If you're submitting all of your company financial information, don't forget to fill out that JP13. That is a new attachment as part of phase 2 that some people are overlooking. So
even if you were an unsuccessful offer, you're required to submit that. So
yes.
Even if you tried and didn't succeed, you will need a JP13 this time.
Good clarification, Kylie. Okay. Let's see if I have anything in the chat or the Q&A that we need to talk about.
We've got one question on are JP3 forms optional? When should they be used?
Well, if that's all you want to know. Okay, so JP3s, we have like what the solicitation says, and then we have best practices, right? So I'm going to try to thread the needle and give you both answers. So a JP3 is required anytime your contract documentation does not stand on its own. So you don't have to have a JP3. But they are a good idea in certain circumstances to include if you have a project that's covering multiple domains. And the reason we want you to think about using a JP3 in those settings is so that you can validate your average annual values and that you meet the domain relevance threshold, right? So if we're just using small business as an example, if you have to show that you had $500,000 worth of average annual value that was relevant to the M&A domain, and you're also trying to take credit for $500,000 that was relevant to the T&E domain, depending on how your contract documentation looks, it may not be cleanly split. We can calculate your overall average annual value, but you might just not have the right level of detail in your statement of work or in your CLINs to be able to say, and here are the CLINs that supported program management, management and advisory, and here are the CLINs that supported technical and engineering. So if it's not cleanly spelled out in your contract documentation, the JP3 is kind of your catch-all, get out of jail free card that says, and here's how we want you to score these and where we're substantiating the credits. So they are technically optional, right? If you look at all of the solicitation guidance, it usually says may submit, right? It doesn't say must submit, it says may submit. But anytime your documentation doesn't stand on its own, you should be using a JP3 and getting it signed.
Yeah, this is one of those, if there is any doubt, there is no doubt.
Yeah.
A JP3 is your catch-all, your protection, your CYA. If you have a prime contract that's automatically relevant in a domain and that's all you're using it for, that would probably be the only time I would say maybe not a JP3. But there could still be stuff that you want to prove, like surge support or the number of FTE if it's not super clear in your contract documentation.
Yeah.
But we have a kind of associated question following that is on our JP3s, we see that the offer is responsible for ensuring that the customer is informed of the solicitation requirements pertaining to the claimed qualifications. So what do you need to tell your customers when you're sending these for signature? My general advice is to describe to them what you're claiming, talk them through the fact that you're submitting for OASIS Plus, and ask if they have any questions or let them know that you're willing to answer any of their questions. For the most part, the work that you are claiming should be substantiated in your contracts. And if you still retain a good relationship with them, this shouldn't be that scary. We do recommend reaching out to them before you send them the JP3 to let them know it's coming. But if you haven't done that, just explaining that you're pursuing OASIS Plus should be sufficient.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that we encourage you guys to do your document markups before you send your JP3s too, so that you can go to the specific parts of the statement of work. A lot of times the client, if they have hesitation in signing, it's because they worry about having to change anything at the contract level. So generally when I contact or when I, write up a draft for a client to send to the contract officer, I might say something like, we are, planning to use this project as credit as a qualified project for OASIS Plus. We would like to claim relevance to these domains. We think it exists because of these tasks that we performed. We're not asking for any change to contractual documentation. There's no, nothing's required in terms of NICS updates or modifications. This is just a form to attest to the fact that you concur it's relevant to here, or that we had 5 labor categories, or that we had 3 functional areas, whatever that happens to be. So the personality of your client might dictate what you actually need to provide them. But again, that's kind of why the order of operations is recommended in the order that it is you've gone through, you've done your homework, you've gotten familiar with the domain, with what the domains entail. And then you can coach the client, like Kiley said, through, here's what we're claiming. You don't have to change anything. It's just how it goes.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things we noticed for JP6s as well, because a lot of people are using task orders for their JP6s, or rather they're using task orders for their qualifying project, and they need JP6s for that past performance. One thing that can help when you're sending those to your contracting officers is to match your JP6 past performance ratings to the IDIQ CPARs if you have them. And you can kind of approach it like, we're just copying over these ratings. If you concur, then you can go ahead and sign. But all of these things really depend on your relationship with your customer. If you don't have a good relationship with them, you may have to be a bit more careful about how you phrase things to them.
Yeah. And then for the latest Q&A or question in the chat, yes, Symphony will auto-calculate the average annual value of a contract based on the start dates and end dates and total contract value that you put in there. But that does not necessarily mean that it's going to carry forward and say, and so all of this average annual value applies for the domain relevance threshold. So you don't have to tag anything for average annual value for the big picture calculation, but you do still have to show relevance to the domain at the QP level.
Our product tracker also calculates that for you. So if you're interested in downloading that.
Yep. It helps. I see more people typing, so I can stay on for a little bit.
No, the question is, if you're using a task order, do you have to have a JP form or a JP6? Same understanding applies to what we were talking about earlier with the JP3s. You only have to have a JP3 or JP6 if you are not able to show your past performance at the task order level, and if you're not able to show evidence of all the things you want to show in your contract. So if you are using your task order as your qualifying project and you have it, actually I say that, but if you have it evaluated at the IDIQ level, you can have a JP6 at the task order level to show different past performance, or use that as your past performance example.
Yeah, and I would just highly encourage everybody to take a real close look at the past performance section. I think it's LDOT 5.6, because it goes into detail about all the specifics around, okay, if you used a project from a JV, here's what you need to do. If you used a collection of task orders, here's what you need to do. If you've used any other regular project type, here's what's expected. And so it covers just about all the bases. But if you still have bases, what am I trying to say?
Whatever.
The bases, all situations. If you still have questions, we can have a one-off conversation and just take a look what you got.
I will say, in anticipation of what you're typing, and just for everyone's clarification, the most recent frequently asked questions has a lot of really great specific circumstances, especially for teaming relationships and especially for JVs. And the way that they responded to those questions is really hopeful in that if you have a really, really specific, crazy situation that you can't distill easily, submitting a question to the government for this, it may take 100 years for them to answer it, but you will probably get an answer that addresses your specific situation in detail and kind of gives you that warm fuzzy. And so that's one of the benefits of this being continuously open, is that if you do have a weird one-off situation that you're just really not sure about, ask the government to clarify, ask them to explain their understanding of things.
Yeah, and zooming out at a high level, the biggest difference that we see in point calculations for primes versus subs, it's not even a point calculation thing, right? Because you can use work from a subcontractor if they're on your OASIS Plus team. They can submit a QP and you can get all the points for that. You can use work that you did as a subcontractor as QP work, as long as you're only taking credit for the portion of the work that you actually performed. And so that's where, it tends to get a little bit tricky for people, is you can't take credit for the prime contract if you weren't, like, the full value of the prime contract and the prime's period of performance. If you were a subcontractor on that, you can only take credit for your section, which is another place that JP3 comes in handy. So you can outline all of those things and get it signed by the prime. And then company certification. So if we're talking about adequate accounting systems, if we're talking about facility clearances, those are only point eligible for the actual prime offer. So you don't get credit for the whole team's certifications unless you're in a JV. That's a whole other set of circumstances. And if you're in a JV, I'm gonna just tell you right now, you need to set up a call with us because it's so nuanced and there's like 17 different ways that could go. But if you're just talking normal prime sub, like work performed as a subcontractor is eligible, provided it meets all those other QP definitions, right? And you're only claiming credit for the work that you did. Yeah, there's probably more to that, but at a big level, high level, that's the short answer.
Please feel free to submit your question to us too. If you want to provide more specific details, you can send it right to this OASIS help. We've had lovingly to all of our clients, we've had a lot of really special circumstances and we've seen a lot of strange relationships, strange novations, strange business
just
practices.
Loopholes, right? So, things where we go, oh, that is really interesting. So yeah.
So please feel free to send it to us. If we can help provide clarity before the government does, we're happy to do so.
Okay. I got to jump. Thanks everybody for attending. We'll get this recording sent out and use that email. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. Take care.